Webb, Chris Paul, James Harden, how's that sound to you?
It sounds interesting. sounds interesting, but you know, myself and other players some have a different perspective maybe than some in the media, in that I'm really interested in seeing how it works. First of all, I love Chris Paul. He's one of the best point guards. You know that in any situation he's going to rock it. He's going to do his thing. But being that the brilliance of last season was James Harden handling the ball, who's a tougher option, moving James to the 2, to me, does not make much sense. It's going to be interesting to see how that works. Also, pace of play. As players, again, you respect Chris Paul, but he's one of the guys that dribbles the ball the most in the league. He's one of the point guards that needs the ball the most. So how does that work with other teammates in a free-flowing offense? Now, Coach D'Antoni, Coach of the Year, I'm sure he'll figure it out. Chris Paul wants to win. I'm sure they'll figure it out. So it's not based on guys' character or are they willing to change. It's just that based on all their bodies of work, this is just very interesting to me, especially when you lose Beverly, who's the heart and soul of the team defensively, and, you know, Lou Williams, who was only there for a second, but, you know, was a leading scorer off the bench last year. So you lose some bench power, even though Gordon's going to step up. So it's just an interesting situation, and I really just want to see how this plays out. And I'm glad I get to do a lot of games on the West Coast next year and watch this team as they go to work.
Webb, what does this say to you about what's going on with the Clippers? And I know Jerry West is in the mix now as a consultant, but CP deciding to leave like this, because they surely had to do this with his blessing. You know, you're not going to just move him without consulting him at all. What does this tell you about what's going on with the Clippers and what their situation might be?
Yeah, I agree with you, Sekou. I don't even think it was his blessing. I think it was his demand. You know, you don't trade Chris Paul unless he says, I want to be traded, period. You know, he was one of the most beloved Clipper, the veteran that you could lead on. But a lot of players felt the last couple of years that it was just the media hyping up the Clippers because of Lob City, but lost the trust in the Clippers 2-3 years ago when the Warriors would beat them up all the time. I remember they were big brother to the Warriors, and the Warriors started beating them up, and they never really did anything from being Lob City. You know, let's just think the Splash Brothers, we haven't really called them that because they've just been winning. It was a unique form, fun to describe them, but you have to kind of out-mature or outlive that moniker that you're given when you're a young team on your way. And so it doesn't surprise me that some major moves were made, but wow, you love the offseason of the NBA because who knew that Chris Paul could be going, you know, to play with a guy that could have been MVP twice in the last 4 years in James Harden.
What do you think Blake Griffin is thinking right now, C-Webb?
You know, I don't know, but it's interesting. I know as a guy that I was blessed to play with great point guards from, you know, Avery Johnson and Tim Hardaway just in practices to Strick to Jay Will, Bibby, and other guys. And I know as a power forward, especially today, you need a guy that knows you, that trusts you, that gets that ball up to you. And so I'm sure he's thinking about who he's going to be running that pick and roll with. I'm sure he's thinking about has his time there. You know, no one wants to be kind of the scapegoat, but then again, some people love embracing and saying, hey, this is my team. So I think he's in a position where he can embrace it, go back to Clippers, be the savior, be this team, prove all of us talking heads wrong, or he could go find another chance. You know, it's really hard to find. I don't think we're going to see a Dirk Nowitzki anymore. Maybe not even see, you know, a Dirk Nowitzki or a Kobe guy staying, or Reggie Miller staying with their team 20 years in this type of climate. And so if he leaves and finds another place, I wouldn't be surprised that right now he just needs to do soul searching and really see what's the best place for him to enjoy his career. That's number one, for him and his family to enjoy his career and to thrive in basketball. So I'm sure this threw a monkey wrench in everyone's plans, and I'm sure we'll see this ripple effect go all the way through the NBA and some moves that you'll see people making or guys you'll see people vying for.
Oh, great. So you're saying we're going to be even busier today.
Oh, I mean, I hope so. Hey, this is what I love, man. I love football, but you know, the best thing about basketball, we really do off-season moves.
Yeah.
Our seasons are great, so I love it. Hopefully, you know, Sekou has to check his phone all day from rumors going on. Hopefully he has some more to report tonight.
Well, Chris, you know, if not for the Chris Paul trade rumors here that he's going to Houston. The biggest news would be that Phil Jackson has been and the Knicks have mutually parted ways here. What do you think of the timing? Less than a week after the draft, where the Knicks had the 8th pick, and about 2 days before free agency, that the Knicks would decide to get rid of Phil Jackson.
I mean, it's interesting. I see that it was mutual, and of course, we don't have all the information, but I have family that live in New York, and I didn't even see the newspaper, and I got text from them this morning telling me that Phil Jackson was going. So I could tell you personally, a lot of New Yorkers are very happy. And anytime you have a young player like Kristaps Porzingis and a guy that the town loves like a Carmelo, you're going to have to, do your best. It didn't seem with some of the comments that he made, whether it was about the entourage of Melo or whether it was trading Porzingis or putting him on the block or other things, that he was as invested as maybe he was as a coach, or maybe he just wasn't as good as he was as a coach. But it's kind of a sad way to see things, part. As a basketball fan, I want to see Phil Jackson come in there and do well. I just don't know with the type of players that we have. One thing about the triangle offense, and I know it very well, is that it put guys on a leash. And this was the days that you had guys and they didn't have maybe the one-on-one skill as guys today. So center opposite plays like that. You could do different things with guys. You made guys valuable and hid some of their lack of skill. Where today, guys don't need to be put on a leash in the triangle. They can score from every position, and there's a bigger emphasis on three. And so I think a lot of it as well was abandoning the triangle offense as far as in their organization. And so it may just be, as much about him as it is his offense. And so, but it's an interesting day and kind of a sad one when you see a legend like Phil has done so much for the game, won so much, and brought so many great memories to fans kind of leave unceremoniously like this.
Well, C. Webb, we appreciate you taking time out on this very busy Wednesday to join us and lend your perspective on all the news floating around the NBA today. We got Sekou Smith, Jared Greenberg. We got David Aldridge, the Hall of Famer, on the phone here. How about this for a Wednesday, DA? Wake up, Phil Jackson's fired, and Chris Paul is now a member of the Rockets.
Yeah, well, it's another more indication of just, I think, the frenzied nature of the league now with again, I think this is all based on Golden State, and you see everybody kind of scrambling to make deals and moves to try and keep up. And it leads to so much more activity, whether it's a team like the Knicks that wasn't getting any sniffs in free agency. Agents were not going to send their players there, so they knew they had to do something to change that equation to get in the game. Or a team like Houston that has a superstar in James Harden, but realizes even having a superstar in this era is not close to good enough to being able to compete for a championship. So everybody is, arming themselves as rapidly as possible.
DA, how does this Chris Paul trade change things for free agency in a couple of days? Does this, put the Clippers in a different situation in terms of who they pursue, or does it shuffle the cards for the rest of the league because Chris Paul is now not available anymore in free agency?
Well, I think the does is, at least from the Clippers standpoint, they're hoping this helps them with Blake Griffin. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that the relationship between Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan was not great. It was workable, but it wasn't great. So now you've removed that. Instead of giving Chris Paul almost $200 million, you now have the opportunity to give Blake Griffin a max contract. And that doesn't mean that he won't take a visit to Boston or Miami or anybody else that's going to make a pitch for him. But I think that it certainly helps the Clippers in terms of potentially keeping him long term. Guys, it's funny. Guys want to play with other guys until they play with other guys. You know what I'm saying? So, Chris Paul, when he was in New Orleans, I'm doing it by myself. I need help. I got to go someplace where they give me help. Well, you got help. I'm not sure I like it here either. So now, Blake will have a much more, I think, opportunity for things to go through him if he stays with the Clippers. So I think that's what they're hoping at least. And so that would obviously have a ripple effect around the rest of the league.
DA, how much of Jerry West's influence or imprint do you think will be on this offseason for the Clippers?
Uh, some, but I don't know that it's going to be, you know, all automatically felt right that there will be some sort of adjustment period and getting to. But I really think Jerry is more for 2018, to be honest with you, and the recruitment of LeBron James, and the recruitment maybe of Paul George now. You got to think of that as a possibility now. You know, that not having to do 3 max contracts, you know, which they would have had to do if you re-sign Chris Paul and you re-sign Blake Griffin. You got 2 max deals already. You've got a near max, well, not a max deal, but a very lucrative contract for DeAndre Jordan. Well, now the Clippers are in a position where next year they can be a little more aggressive in free agency, and maybe they get into the Paul George sweepstakes. So I think that's where Jerry's influence will come into play more than anything else.
We've got David Aldridge joining us here live on the phone with Sekou Smith, Jared Greenberg, talking about the deal that would have Chris Paul sent to Houston. What's your take on how on and off the court Chris Paul and James Harden work together?
Well, I mean, look, they know each other, obviously, from international competition, Olympic team, world championship teams, all that sort of thing. And so they, you know, they have a relationship, they have a friendship. I believe that James Harden was very willing to be the point guard this year and enjoyed the role. But I think we saw at the end of the playoffs how worn out he was by it. I just think he was worn out by it, almost literally worn out by it. And so I think his desire to get somebody who could take the ball handling responsibilities away from him so he could play more off the ball, do more of what he does with score. I think that the proof's in the pudding. Obviously, you don't make this deal without James Harden's not only blessing but encouragement. So, you know, now James Harden will sign his long-term extension, I'm sure, in short fashion after this summer. After this year, Chris Paul will sign an extension there, and so you know they'll be together for the next 3 to 5 years and see how far that they can go together.
Well, DA, you also wrote a story which was supposed to be the lead story of the day, that Phil Jackson and the Knicks were no longer going to be working together. What is it that you believe, as you write here this story, about what led James Dolan to finally step in after months of Dolan saying, in fact, he went on I believe it was ESPN Radio in New York with Michael Kay and said, people wanted me to be hands-off, so now I'm going to be hands-off and let Phil do his thing. What finally convinced Dolan to say, all right, enough's enough?
Well, look, I think the Porzingis thing was the last straw. I mean, it just doesn't. It literally made no sense what Phil was doing with Porzingis. You can say he got sideways with Carmelo Anthony, and you know, maybe. And Carmelo Anthony's in his 30s now, and so maybe you want to make a trade and rebuild and get assets for him and build your team around Porzingis. Okay, you can do that. I think most people would say, all right, that makes some sense. But to say you're contemplating trading a 21-year-old player who just grew 2 more inches last year and is the only player in the league that does what he does at his size because you are thinking about the future makes absolutely no sense to anybody. That doesn't make any sense at all. So I think that was the last straw for James Dolan, because it's, you know, Porzingis is a guy they can build a team around. They have a chance to be better down the road with him, to kind of shop him around when he's already proven he can play at a high level in the NBA. That just didn't make any sense. So I think that was the last straw for James Dolan.